For decades, Hollywood hid more secrets than the silver screen ever showed. And no one knew that better than SAL MINEO, the Academy Award-nominated star of Rebel. Without a Cause lived a life that was both dazzling and dangerous. Behind his boyish smile and captivating charm, Mineo carried a truth that could have destroyed his career. A truth that only came fully to light after his shocking death at just 37 years old, long before the world was ready to talk about sexuality in the entertainment industry. SAL MINEO was quietly living his truth in a world that refused to accept it. Behind closed doors, he formed deep connections with some of Hollywood's most famous leading men, actors whose names are still whispered in the shadows of old studio lots. The same men who played heroes on screen were fighting their own private battles off it. Mineo's story is one of courage, heartbreak, and betrayal. A man ahead of his time, trapped in an industry built on illusion. Friends close to him later revealed that he kept a hidden journal, one that included the names of 5 major Hollywood actors he had once been romantically involved with. And the shocking part? All 5 were household names who projected the image of perfect masculinity. In the final years of his life, Sal had begun to open up more publicly, even hinting in interviews that he'd loved men who could never love themselves. But before he could share everything, his life was cut short, brutally and mysteriously, in a Hollywood tragedy that stunned the nation. Now, decades later, the truth about who those men were and what they meant to SAL MINEO is finally coming to light, and it reveals a side of classic Hollywood few have ever dared to see. In the 1950s, few young actors burned brighter than SAL MINEO. He was more than just another handsome face on the screen. He was raw emotion, restless energy, and fearless talent bundled into one magnetic presence. Hollywood had never seen anyone quite like him. From the moment he appeared alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, audiences could feel it. This wasn't just acting. This was a young man bearing his soul. Born in the Bronx in 1939 to Italian-American parents, Mineo's rise was a true American dream story. His childhood was far from glamorous. Growing up in a working-class family, he found escape in performance. By his early teens, he was acting on Broadway, where his natural charisma quickly caught the eye of Hollywood scouts. He was barely 16 when he landed his breakout role as Plato, the lonely and misunderstood teenager who worships James Dean's character in Rebel Without a Cause. It was a performance so emotionally charged, so ahead of its time, that it earned Mineo an Academy Award nomination. Critics called him the boy with the soulful eyes. But for Sal, that role was more than just a performance. It was a reflection of something deeply personal. The loneliness, the confusion, the yearning for acceptance, all of it came from within. Behind the scenes, the connection between SAL MINEO and James Dean was instant and electric. They understood each other in ways few others could. Both young, both outsiders, both carrying secrets that Hollywood didn't want to see. Many who knew them at the time claimed their friendship blurred into something deeper, an unspoken bond built on shared pain and vulnerability. Sal never publicly confirmed it, but those close to him often said he never got over Dean, even long after the star's tragic car crash. Following Rebel, Mineo became one of the most sought-after young actors in America. He starred in Giant, 1956, Crime in the Streets, 1956, and Exodus, 1960, where his portrayal of a young Jewish freedom fighter earned him another Oscar nomination. He was the first actor of his generation to be nominated twice before turning 25, a feat that should have guaranteed a lifetime of success. But Hollywood, with all its glory, is a cruel machine. The same studio system that built SAL MINEO into a teen idol quickly began to turn on him when rumors about his sexuality started to swirl. The roles that once came easily began to dry up, Leading men of that era were expected to be straight, rugged, and untouchable. And Sal, no matter how he tried to hide it, didn't quite fit that mold anymore. By the mid-1960s, the career that once soared to impossible heights began to crumble. Casting directors labeled him difficult, too emotional, or too controversial. But those who truly knew him saw something else, a man trying to live authentically in a world built on pretense. It was around this time that Sal began forming deeper, more personal relationships with other actors. Men who, like him, were forced to hide behind carefully constructed public images. Some were married, others were heartthrobs adored by millions of women. But behind closed doors, they sought the same connection and understanding Sal offered so freely. He wasn't looking for scandal. He was searching for love. "I just want to be loved without fear," he once confided to a close friend. Those words would come to define the rest of his life. In the late 1960s, as Hollywood slowly began to change, Mineo reinvented himself. He turned to theater, directing and performing in plays that challenged audiences to see him as more than the lost boy from Rebel Without a Cause. He spoke openly about his identity among friends, no longer willing to pretend. He knew the risks, but he was tired of living in silence. Still, few could have predicted how abruptly his story would end, or the dark secrets he would take with him to the grave. Because as Mineo tried to reclaim his voice, his past, and the powerful men he once loved, were about to catch up with him in ways no one could have imagined. By the mid-1960s, Sal Mineo had experienced both the dizzying highs of stardom and the crushing lows of Hollywood rejection. Once hailed as the next great American actor, he now found himself on the outside looking in, a victim of a system that punished anyone who dared to be different. Behind his charming smile and easy laugh was a man burdened by secrets, one whose private life was far more complicated than his adoring fans could ever imagine. Hollywood in that era was a fortress built on illusion. Every actor had an image carefully crafted by the studios. The tough guy, the heartthrob, the family man. Publicists controlled what reporters saw, what fans believed, and what stars could say. For someone like Mineo, whose heart didn't fit neatly into the mold, that world could be suffocating. To reveal too much, or to be seen with the wrong person, could destroy a career overnight. Friends later recalled that Sal often felt trapped between two identities: the public figure the studios wanted, and the private man yearning to be honest. He confided in a few close companions that he had been involved in several deep, complicated relationships with other actors. Men who, like him, lived in fear of being exposed. These weren't tabloid flings or reckless affairs. They were emotional lifelines in a world that demanded secrecy. "We were all just trying to survive," he once said, according to a friend. "We didn't have words for what we were feeling back then. We just knew we couldn't tell anyone." The constant pressure to hide took its toll. Sal began to drink more, to withdraw, and to lash out at the industry that had once celebrated him. Yet even in his frustration, he refused to become bitter. Instead, he turned his pain into art. He began writing plays and exploring projects that reflected his reality. Stories about loneliness, identity, and freedom. One of those projects, a play he hoped to produce in Los Angeles, was said to draw heavily from his own experiences of loving in secret. Mineo's friends described this period as one of deep reflection and quiet rebellion. "He stopped pretending," one colleague said. "He knew Hollywood would never fully accept him, so he stopped trying to please it." The result was some of the most honest and mature work of his life. On stage, he was raw and fearless. Off stage, he began to open up more, not to the press, but to those he trusted. The 1970s brought a small resurgence in his career, but also an increase in risk. Society was changing slowly, but the old prejudices lingered. Some casting directors still whispered about his reputation, Studio executives who once fought to sign him now avoided his name altogether. Still, Mineo remained optimistic. "I've played Lost Boys my whole life," he said in one interview. "Maybe it's time people see that those boys grow up." He had reason to hope. A new generation of actors was emerging, braver, more open, less afraid of challenging old taboos. And though Mineo didn't yet realize it, he had quietly paved the way for them. By refusing to conform, by daring to love and live on his own terms, he became a symbol of quiet defiance in an era that demanded silence. Privately, though, he was still haunted by the fear of exposure. The gossip columns had long hinted at his unconventional lifestyle, and Mineo worried that a single careless moment could undo everything he had worked for. He kept his circle small, his personal life guarded. But Hollywood had sharp eyes and long memories, and secrets, no matter how well hidden, rarely stayed buried forever. As the decade wore on, Sal was preparing for a true comeback. He'd secured a promising stage role in Los Angeles and was finally ready to tell his story through his art. Friends say he was happier than he had been in years, focused, inspired, and hopeful. But fate had other plans. Just as he was reclaiming his life, a tragic night in February 1976 would end it all and leave behind more questions than answers. By early 1976, Sal Mineo was on the brink of a long-awaited comeback. After years of professional struggles and personal doubts, he had finally found his footing again, both as an artist and as a man. The boy who once symbolized Hollywood's troubled youth had matured into a thoughtful, passionate actor determined to rebuild his life on his own terms. He had just been cast in a major stage production of P.S. Your Cat is Dead, a bold and edgy play that was already generating buzz for its honesty and energy. For the first time in years, Sal felt hopeful. He told friends he was ready for a second act. On the evening of February 12, 1976, that second act was just beginning. Mineo had spent the day rehearsing for the play in West Hollywood, full of energy and excitement. Around 9 p.m., he parked his car outside his apartment building on Holloway Drive, a quiet, unassuming street just off the Sunset Strip. The neighborhood was peaceful, the air cool and still. What happened next would shock not just Hollywood, but the entire nation. As Mineo stepped out of his car, he was attacked. Neighbors later reported hearing a shout, then the sound of footsteps running away. Within moments, Sal collapsed in the parking lot, bleeding from a single stab wound to the chest. A resident found him barely conscious, whispering for help. But by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. The man who had once lit up the screen with such life and sensitivity was gone at just 37 years old. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines across the country mourned the brutal death of one of Hollywood's most promising talents. Friends, fans, and colleagues were stunned. How could a man so full of life and potential be cut down so senselessly? At first, theories swirled wildly. Some speculated it was a robbery gone wrong, while others whispered darker rumors that Mineo's private life had somehow played a role. In the shadowy world of 1970s Hollywood, even tragedy wasn't immune to scandal. Police investigators combed through Mineo's life, looking for answers. They discovered no sign of forced entry in his home, and nothing missing from his car or wallet. That only deepened the mystery. Hollywood's rumor mill went into overdrive, painting lurid pictures of secret meetings and jealous lovers. Stories mostly built on conjecture rather than truth. The media's obsession with Mineo's personal life made it even harder for his loved ones to grieve. One friend angrily told reporters, "They're treating him like a headline, not a human being." For more than a year, the case remained unsolved. It wasn't until 1977 that a break finally came. A young man named Lionel Ray Williams, a pizza delivery driver with a history of robbery, was arrested and charged with Mineo's murder. Authorities determined that the attack was likely a random act of violence, not a targeted killing or anything connected to Sal's personal relationships. Williams was convicted in 1979 and sentenced to life in prison. Even with a conviction, the tragedy never felt fully resolved. Those close to Mineo struggled to accept that such a senseless crime could end such a meaningful life. "It wasn't supposed to end like that," one friend said. "He was just getting started again." In the years that followed, Mineo's death became a symbol of both the cruelty of fate and the fragility of fame. His murder had robbed the world of a voice that was just beginning to be heard again. Yet, in the wake of that loss, a quiet legacy began to form, one that would grow stronger with time. The people who loved him refused to let him be remembered only as a victim. They spoke instead of his laughter, his generosity, his creativity, and his courage. They told stories of a man who fought against a system that tried to silence him, and who, even in his final days, still believed in love, art, and truth. Today, decades later, Sal Mineo's story is no longer just about tragedy. It's about a man who dared to live authentically in an age of fear, and who left behind a legacy far greater than his short life would suggest. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest tragedies, and yet Sal Mineo's story continues to resonate, not because of the way his life ended, but because of what it stood for. Decades after his death, his name still carries the quiet power of defiance, vulnerability, and truth in an era that demanded silence. Sal didn't just make movies, he made history, though the world didn't realize it until long after he was gone. In the years following his death, something unexpected began to happen. Younger generations, discovering his work for the first time, saw in him not just a talented actor, but a pioneer. His performance in Rebel Without a Cause had already been iconic, but now critics began to see its deeper meaning: a coded, heartbreaking portrayal of a young man desperate for acceptance in a world that refused to understand him. It was the role that defined his career, and in many ways, his life. Hollywood, ever reluctant to confront its past, had long avoided talking about Mineo's personal truth. But by the late 1980s and 1990s, as society began to evolve, his story found new relevance. Filmmakers, journalists, and historians started to revisit his legacy, seeing him as one of the first major stars to quietly challenge the unspoken rules of masculinity and identity in the film industry. His courage, even if expressed in subtle ways, had opened the door for others to follow. Those who had known him remembered not a tragic figure, but a man bursting with life and passion. Actor friends described him as someone who loved deeply, laughed easily, and refused to let the industry's hypocrisy crush his spirit. "He didn't live in fear," one former co-star recalled. "He lived in truth, even when it cost him everything." In time, Hollywood began to make amends in its own way. Documentaries and biographies about Sal Mineo explored not just the sensational headlines of his death, but the humanity behind them. They revealed an artist who wanted nothing more than to be authentic, to tell stories that mattered, and to show others that love, in all its forms, was worth the risk. For Mineo's fans, his rediscovery felt like justice. They celebrated him not as a tragic cautionary tale, but as a symbol of courage. The young man who once felt invisible had finally been seen for who he truly was. His films, from Rebel Without a Cause to Exodus, became more than cinematic classics. They became emotional testaments to a performer who refused to hide behind a mask. Even now, his influence can be felt in Hollywood's evolving landscape. Many modern actors who live openly and authentically owe something in spirit to the groundwork Mineo helped lay, often unknowingly, just by being himself. In a world that told him to stay silent, he dared to whisper. And that whisper eventually became a voice that could no longer be ignored. His story also serves as a reminder of the human cost of fame. For all its glamour, Hollywood in the mid-20th century demanded conformity at the expense of identity. Mineo's life reminds us that behind every perfect smile and glossy photograph was often a person struggling to belong. And yet, despite the pain and secrecy, he managed to create art that transcended it all. Today, visitors still leave flowers and letters at his grave in Glendale, California. Some write about how Rebel Without a Cause helped them through their own isolation. Others thank him for his bravery. His fans may never have met him, but they feel they know him, because everything he was, he left on the screen. Sal Mineo didn't get the long, celebrated career he deserved, but in the end, he achieved something even greater: immortality through honesty. His courage to live truthfully, even when the world wasn't ready, paved the way for generations of artists to come. And though his life ended too soon, the legacy he left behind burns brighter than ever. A flicker of light in a time of darkness, reminding us all that the most powerful thing a person can ever do is simply be themselves.